find myself these days, as I think you might well imagine, talking a lot about what's the good news and what's the bad news. So the good news is that in our state today, we are adding jobs. The bad news is, of course, our unemployment rate continues to be high. The good news is we're getting people the training that they need. If they need a career shift, we're helping them pay their bills and putting food on their table. The bad news is, unfortunately, our revenue's down. So for those services that we have to provide, demand is up and the revenue is down. The good news is it's summertime out. The bad news, Mother Nature doesn't care. The good news is you come here and you see some of the top names in entertainment, including folks like Steve Martin. The bad news is Steve was here last week, and this morning all you get is the sheriff and me. Over the last couple of years, I've learned that, and I think Senator Tim Sheldon would tell you the same thing, we have faced crisis after crisis in terms of the economy in our state and the challenges that have been before our legislature, our families, and our businesses. And I've learned really in tough times, and I read a lot after we started into this recession about the Great Depression. And what I learned is how we survived the Great Depression is because people started looking out for their fellow human being. And I will tell you that the volunteers that you recognized here this morning, Sheriff, is what I've seen all across the state. People are stepping up and stepping out and saying, I want to help as we get through these very troubling times. I had a wake-up call here. I made a pledge that I would volunteer at least once a month, so too with my family. And I went to a food bank in Seattle here a couple of months ago. Folks would come through the line and they would recognize, more often than not, the mariner who was standing next to me. But anyway, they would recognize one of us. And a gentleman came through and he recognized me. And he said, I want to thank you for being here today. And I want you to know I've been at this food bank for years. This is, however, the first time I've been on this side of the table. And it was a dawning moment for me that at any given time, any one of us could find ourselves on the receiving end of someone's generosity and volunteerism. And so if we as a state can step up, unite together, and look out for our fellow human being, we're going to get through these tough times. We, this past year, however, as I look at the economy, it pales in comparison to what we saw in our law enforcement community. It was the most tragic year in 70 years in the state of Washington. Too many times we have been reminded about our officers and the danger that they face. True also of those in firefighting, as evidenced by our fire chief that we lost just this last week. We lost some people in a tragic fire in Fremont, in Seattle. Those who went to save them weren't able to do it, but it's a reminder to all of us about how tough your jobs are. People often ask me, if you knew then what you know now, would you have run for governor? My answer is yes. But before I feel sorry for myself, I always remember that those in firefighting, those in first response, those in law enforcement, at any given moment, are called to break down a door because of a fire, are called to an emergency because there's been a rollover, are called when they are needed the most by their fellow human being. And never do they shy away from that responsibility. And always do they put their lives at risk when they do so. Their families are there and supporting them and putting out 100% support as well. So I know it even happened tougher for this community because, of course, Officer Keena Griswold was from Shelton. And I know when her life was lost, it touched this community well beyond the borders of the Lakewood police officers and well beyond the borders of Pierce County. But I also want you to know during those tough times this past year, I saw something yet again amazing. I saw with the outpouring of our first responders at the memorial services, our firefighters and our law enforcement, that there was a uniting of the people around the state. If you would go to one of the memorial services and drive in, you would see people lining the sidewalks as we approached the memorial service. They're finally stepping out and saying, we want you to know how much we support you and how much we thank you. All too often, that thanks and that respect and appreciation is not exhibited. It has been over this last year. But the way in which our first responders conducted themselves during those memorial services served to unite those communities and make them feel that they could get through these very difficult times. And as I spent a lot of time with the families and periodically continue to do so, it is because of the law enforcement community that has really smothered them with love and support that they are getting through the toughest time in their lives. So together, we have survived that tough time, but we have never, nor will we ever, forget what happened. As we approach the legislative session, as one might expect, all too often when we're befallen with a tragedy, whether it's a wildfire, a flood, or a law enforcement officer who's died, people become incensed that how could this have happened and it can't be prevented. And so the legislature was confronted with that very attitude about how in the world 4 officers sitting having coffee getting ready for their shifts could have lost their lives. So there became this attitude of, well, we've got to do something, but all too often, well-intentioned legislators strike out to do something positive, unknowing that what they might do might in fact cause more problems than help. So we put together the boots on the ground, the first responders, the law enforcement community, and we said to them, you tell us what needs to be done. Don't let us tell you, you tell us what needs to be done. And I can't be more proud than in a very short period of time, they came together with a list of recommended legislative pieces that almost all were passed. And the legislature said, if this is their idea of what we need, we're going to embrace it and we're going to get it done. And I was very thankful for that. Let me give you an example of what was done. You're going to see on the ballot this fall, the constitutional amendment. I'm here today to ask you to support it. It helps our judges be able to use discretion in setting bail and not be restrained by those who present a real risk to our communities. Long overdue, in my opinion, much needed in this state. But we also had a law that to give survivor help to families of those who lost their lives in the line of duty, the officer had to have served 10 years. Let me give you a true story about one of the officers who lost his life last year. He was hurt. He was brought into the hospital. He hadn't been on the force 10 years. He was in a coma. During those few days that he was in a coma, he passed that 10th year anniversary. What was the difference for him the day before the incident took place versus the day after he died from the coma and the tragic injury? Nothing to his families. So whether you spend 1 day, 1 year, 10 years, or more, if you lose your life in the line of duty as a law enforcement officer, we the people of the state of Washington should stand by your family. And that's what the legislature passed, and I'm very proud of the work they did in that effort. The other one is when we have a family, and all of those officers at Lakewood had children. Those children ought to be given a chance to go to college. And the people of the state of Washington ought to be there to support those children and make sure they get that chance to go to college. And again, the legislature with recommendations stood up and said, we're going to make that happen. And so that has occurred as well. So the fact of the matter is, out of a terrible tragedy, some good things have happened. I personally happen to be a glass half full. Take the lessons learned, make sure you do your best that it doesn't happen again. I was incensed by the attitude of the state that sent Maurice Clement to Washington State. How they had refused to take him back at our request. So I have my Department of Corrections now working with Interstate Compact to make sure that doesn't happen again. And out of this tragedy will come a change nationally in how receiving states have now more authority over those who are brought into their state under supervision. Well, that's as it should have been a long time ago. And while there have been many attempts to change that, they've all failed. It took this tragedy, unfortunately, but now we're on the path of making that change. Again, it's the right thing to do.